Hi everybody, I hope you're all doing really well. Back today to do my wrap up for all of the books that I read in February. I actually started off this reading month with a reread. I have said previously how I really want to go back through old favourite books in order to determine which possibly like 10 or 12 of those would be my favourite books of all time. But I feel like I can't properly judge that without going back and rereading all of them and kind of comparing them against each other. I want to make more of a concerted effort to do that this year, and so I had two rereads. The first one being The Invisible Life of Addie by V. Schwab. It was really nice to get back to this one. I don't think I've read it since the end of 2021. Starting off in the 18th century, following our protagonist Addie LaRue, or Adeline as she is born, who makes this Faustian pact with a demonic-like creature to live forever, to be accountable to nobody. But what she doesn't realise until she's taken the deal is that the catch is that nobody will ever remember her. And so we see her through 300 years of living with this curse, working out all of its intricacies and the loopholes, when in 2014 New York she comes across a man who does remember her and is trying to work out how that could possibly be. It was really interesting reading this one back, and I was really struck by how contained Addie is in her world. She is a lot less travelled than I remember her being, but to me it makes a lot of sense. I know that when this book first came out, or actually probably the backlash to the popularity that it did have, a lot of it was centred around the fact that she doesn't really travel that much and that she kind of stays around Europe and America, and how ridiculous it would be for her to have this ability to do whatever she wants and yet she only sticks to these areas and she doesn't travel the world. To me, actually rereading this back, maybe it's because I like this book and therefore I'm a bit defensive of it, but I feel like a lot of those criticisms were actually quite disingenuous or just completely ignored the stipulations of the curse. Because to me, reading this, it actually makes total sense that Addie would be as contained and limited in her travel as she actually is. It was interesting noting how almost every time that Addie does make a big move, it's actually as a result of the devil Luke kind of forcing her out of her immediate surroundings because he wants her to be less comfortable. And I actually think that's really true to how a lot of people operate. A lot of us have these big dreams that we're going to travel, we're going to explore, we're going to do more with our lives, and then if we're actually given the opportunities, often don't take them because we are scared. I think it goes to show the limitations of Addie, that she feels like she's brimming with this potential that if she was given the opportunities to do something with, she would take it. And yet when she's actually given those opportunities, she doesn't. She doesn't do as much as she could do. That to me feels actually very real to how most humans operate. But also it does make sense with the stipulations of the curse that Addie wouldn't make big travel plans without being pushed to by Luke. For starters, we know the fact that people don't remember her. So how is, say, a captain of a ship or the stewards on an airplane meant to remember her? She can't even stay in an inn overnight without being kicked out, because as soon as they turn their backs on her, they completely forget her. She's not going to be able to learn to drive because any driving instructor she would have would forget her. So yeah, to me it makes complete sense why she would stick to places that she knows and just get to know them very, very well and never branch out without having a big push to do so. And then the second reread that I had this month was When a Scot Ties the Knot by Tessa. This is one of my favourite historical romances, following our main character of Madeline Gracechurch, who is incredibly socially anxious and shy, who when she was a teenager, in order to avoid having to go out to the ton and being forced on the marriage mart, invented a fictional Scottish soldier, Captain Logan Mackenzie, as her fake fiancé. She kept up this ruse for a number of years, benefited greatly from not being forced out into society, and even ended up inheriting a Scottish castle as a result of her deception, which is where she's been living with her eccentric aunt away from the rest of her family. However, one day when she's in her late 20s, she gets a knock on the door, and who should it be but an actual, very real Captain Logan Mackenzie, who has received all of the letters that she addressed to him, thinking that they weren't going to go anywhere, who basically blackmails her into marrying him, or else he's going to reveal all to the London gossip columns. It is perfect. I have no notes. It is so much fun. The first new to me book that I read in February was Totally Chaotic History, Roman Britain Gets Rowdy by Greg Jenner, with contributions from historian Emma Southon. This is a lovely children's history of Roman Britain, which goes from 100 BCE all the way through to 409 CE, presenting this history of Roman Britain in a really, really fun, accessible way, complete with loads of illustrations, going through all the big major events, noting particularly where this history gets more lively and chaotic, as well as the day-to-day goings-on of living in Roman Britain. It is really fun while also being educational. I had recently read the first book in the series, which focused on ancient Egypt, and I don't know if it's just that I find Emma Southon, the historical consultant who Greg utilises for this book and who provides a lot of commentary to Greg's writing, I don't know if she just fits the tone of this series a little bit better because she herself is a very witty, engaging history writer, but I did find myself enjoying myself a lot more with this than I did with the Ancient Egypt installment. And I felt like the interactions back and forth between Greg and Emma just felt a little bit more natural. They seem to get each other's tone very well. So yeah, if you have any young'uns in your life, or you are a big kid at heart who just wants to read a very accessible, really fun history, then I definitely recommend this. A history with a more adult audience in mind is Henry V, The Astonishing Rise of England's Greatest Warrior King by Dan Jones. I have previously read a few non-fiction histories by Dan Jones. I've read his Magna Carta and Power and Thrones. I've also recently really been enjoying his historical fiction with the Essex Dogs trilogy. I was really keen to get to read a biography from Dan Jones because I haven't seen him focus on one figure all the way through a book. And this is no mean feat, him taking on Henry V, who is one of our arguably most iconic kings. Henry V succeeded his father Henry IV in 1413 and reigned through to 1422 when he died, and is best known for his military victories during the 100 Years' War, particularly and most iconically the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. He's also probably best known to many people through the Shakespearean depictions of him, the young rebellious prince who turned much more serious as he took the throne. Dan Jones takes all of these notions that we have, filters through all of the myth and legend to bring a much more balanced view and perspective on Henry V. Something that was really interesting about this is that he tells it in present tense, so there's a real immediacy, and you feel a lot closer to Henry V, who a lot of the time can come off a little bit of an automaton. You don't really get a whole lot of personality from a lot of sources about him. He can sometimes appear a little bit aloof, but he felt very human. Another interesting choice that Dan Jones makes is that he very deliberately does not start his reign until halfway through the book, so we really get a chance to mull over Henry V's early life. I found this incredibly engaging, and I always knew from Dan Jones' writing style that I was going to probably enjoy this, but the subject matter I was a little bit shaky on. He's one of the medieval kings that I know the most about, but I've never felt particularly close to him, you know, because a lot of what he is most well known for is for his military victories, which is not always the way to get to my heart. But actually I found this so incredibly enjoyable to read because we had this very human, understandable figure at the centre of it. I don't want to say for sure, but this might be my favourite new to me book that I've read so far this year. I definitely enjoyed it. And then because it was Valentine's Day, I decided that I wanted to read the Improbable Meet Cute series, which is a series of novellas all centred around Valentine's Day. And from the title you can guess that our couples end up meeting each other through quite bizarre circumstances. I had read the Christmas variant of this Under the Mistletoe back in late November, early December, and so I wanted to give this a go. And I would say probably questionable results. The only one that I think is really worth reading is the first one, which is The Exception to the Rule by Christina, which sees our couple meeting through an email exchange on February 14th when an accidental email sent to the wrong person ends up becoming a years-long correspondence where they only interact with each other on February 14th, keeping up an annual tradition of talking to each other but without revealing who the other person is. As each year passes, they get closer and become more intrigued with each other, even starting to fall in love with each other, even though, as I say, their correspondence is only via email and only on one day a year. Quite a one-day vibe. And yes, this is as improbable and improbable meet cute as you are likely to find, but I think it's Christina Lauren's writing that is so witty and so full of charming banter that really pulls you through. I found myself really invested in this couple, even though I knew in the back of my mind, like, this is not realistic at all. And because it's a romance, you know where it's going to go, but I still found myself really, really charmed by it. Next we had Worst Wingman Ever by Addie Jimenez. I've never read any Addie Jimenez, but I hear really great things. And this was probably my second favourite out of the novellas, so if you have any recommendations of where I should go next, do let me know. In this, our female main character is really reeling as she, as a nurse, is having to deal with the fact that she knows that her grandma is soon to die. She's visiting her grandmother frequently in the days leading up to her death and finds a Valentine's Day note on her car that was not intended for her, and discovers that this Valentine's Day card was placed there by the best friend of the sender, who had meant to place it on his friend's girlfriend's car but mistook it for our main character. And every day they send notes to each other back and forth. He will do little acts of kindness like pumping up her tyres when he notices one of them is flat, giving life advice back and forth. But our female main character knows that this can only last so long because she's not going to be staying in this location forever. But they're really starting to get a real kinship and a dynamic going but she doesn't know who this mystery man is. Once again, I think the writing of this and the relationship dynamic between not only the romantic relationship, but also the relationship between our female main character and her grandmother were really sweet. There was a really lovely line that the grandmother gave her, which was, take responsibility for your own unhappiness. If you don't love your life, change it. That definitely stuck with me. If I did have any criticism for this, is that the ending was rather abrupt, and I wish we'd had a little bit more time. The next one was Rosie and the Dreamboat by Sally Thorne, and I'm starting to feel like maybe Sally Thorne is a bit of a one-trick pony for me, because I love the hating game, I hated Angelica Frankenstein Mix Her Match, and I found Rosie and the Dreamboat to be one of the more ridiculous premises. So we have Rosie, who has decided to go on a Valentine's Day treat to a spa with her sister. She and her sister end up using these flotation devices, which I'm sure you've seen. There's little flotation pods where you're meant to just lie there for an hour, just stewing in very salty water. Apparently that's relaxing. However, they are new to the spa. It's the first time that anybody has ever used them, and while Rosie's sister ends up getting out of hers fine, Rosie ends up trapped in the flotation tank, which leads to a very hunky firefighter being sent out to try and get her out of the flotation device, which seems like the most mortifying thing that could ever happen. However, they end up having a conversation, Rosie in the flotation device, he on the outside trying to keep her calm, and they start to fall for each other in the hour that ensues. I mean, as much as I enjoyed the banter in this, I couldn't stop thinking about the fact that they went from 0 to 100 in terms of attraction within the space of about 2 sentences to each other. I was fully convinced that this whole story was a flotation device fever dream and nothing else. It just was so ridiculous. I also found it so icky how this man who she does not know, who she's never seen, referred to her as my brave little Rosie clamshell. Ew. He also drops the line that all romance girls love to hear, which was, who did that to you? It just seemed like a bit much for me. Another one that was maybe just a little bit too much for me was Drop, Cover and Hold On by Jasmine Guillory, in which we have our female main character who is a frequent customer at this bakery, which is run by this pastry chef who seems to absolutely hate her. However, one day just before closing, she's at the bakery when an earthquake strikes and they are trapped in this bakery alone. And as a result of this, all of their secrets come tumbling out, and we realise that maybe the pastry chef didn't hate her quite so much as she was led to believe. You know, a simple enough premise, probably the most believable of our different improbable meet cutes, but I just found the dialogue in this so cringy and unbelievable. What I found most frustrating was the main character, who was just so ridiculously dim, could not take a hint. It is very clear from the writing how attracted this pastry chef is to her, and it just does not click for her for so long. Next up was With Any Luck by Ashley Poston. The quirk of our female main character being that every time that she kisses somebody, they very soon after end up finding their perfect person. She has been enlisted as the best man or best woman for her male best friend, but then on their stag's do the night before the wedding, she ends up drunkenly kissing him, and then the next morning is horrified to discover that the groom is nowhere to be seen. And so our main character is convinced that she has doomed his relationship, that he's run away because he's found his true love that night, and that it might not be the bride, and so enlists help of the other best man to retrace her steps and work out what has gone on. And predictably, the best woman and the best man end up falling in love along the way. This was perfectly fine. Definitely not the most ridiculous of these premises, but also because it's not so ridiculous, it's not quite as fun, and probably the least memorable of this bunch. Then the final one, and I wish I could say that we ended on a high, but in actual fact we ended on the worst of this bunch, which was Royal Valentine by Sariah Wilson, in which our main character is a princess of a small European nation who decides that she's going to swap places with one of her staff to have a few more days in Rome. However, she ends up coming over all sleepy, out of nowhere, and ends up bumping into a Highlander living in Rome who takes her under his wing and shows her all of the sights of Rome. And all I can say in response to this is that Audrey Hepburn and Gregory Peck did not change lives in Roman Holiday for this terrible, terrible novella. Like, obviously this is meant to be somewhat in tribute to Roman Holiday, but every choice that it makes is the worst possible choice. There is no charm to this, there is no poignant ending. These characters and their personalities are absolutely ridiculous. I did not enjoy this one. If you want a taste of a story like this, just watch Roman Holiday. It is so much better. And you actually get likeable, charming leads who have great chemistry and who you grow to love rather than whatever this was. So there we go. That is the first half of my February wrap up. Do let me know if you've read any of the books I've spoken to you about today. Alternatively, please let me know about any reads that you had for February. I would love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic, fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.